So, what is the Enneagram? Have you all seen this symbol before? So, Ennea is the Greek word for 9. Gram is a diagram. So, it's not a mystical name necessarily. It's pretty practical. But I want to pull apart the symbol, which does have some mysticism in it. The Enneagram base is a circle, which acknowledges the unity of a system, wholeness, perhaps an aim toward the journey. This symbol of unity is often a symbol for God. See it a lot in Celtic spirituality. The triangle is a symbol of balance. You'll see in just a little bit, or if you look on the back of your sheet, you have a symbol of the Enneagram on the back to reference throughout the class, if that's helpful. That the 3 numbers associated with the triangle bring a balance to the Enneagram system. Triangle is a very sturdy shape. It is Trinitarian in nature. And then we have the hexad, which is an unusual shape. You may have never seen it before, except for in the Enneagram symbol. And it is an image of dynamism. And the numbers associated on these points are less stable than those in the triangle. They're sort of seated precariously on these 2 points, as you see at the bottom, not quite the stable base that a triangle gives. But it gives us this sense that there's this sense of motion with the hexad. So these are the types that are always moving, and the triangle sort of holds the stasis of the structure, and then together there's a wholeness with that energy of waiting and that energy of moving. Cool. But what's it for? Right? So some of these might be systems of personality that you've seen before. It can be a dizzying maze of Facebook tests that you might take. The Enneagram is different from these other systems in that so many of the systems are trying to put you inside of a box, and that's why a lot of people don't like personality tests. But the Enneagram is trying to help you get out of the box you've placed yourself in. And we're looking at the Christian roots of this ancient spirituality. And so this word sin is going to come up. And we're going to dive into it a little bit by going back to the 4th century and what it meant then. But would someone read aloud for me in your best voice this quotation from Richard Rohr? Someone just read out. Go ahead and read it out. Yep.
That Enneagram does not have the intention of flattering or stroking the empirical ego. Rather, it aims to support efforts to let go or render unnecessary what Thomas Merton calls the false self.
So I will tell you a secret, the secret of the Enneagram. Whatever number you decide describes your ego personality, that is not you. That is not you. And the Enneagram tries to help you see that and give some encouragement along the way as you try to figure out, well, then who am I, if not this? With someone else who loves Thomas Merton. Anybody love Thomas Merton in the room? All right, you get to read it aloud then. Thomas Merton lover, come on. Yeah, please. You can do it.
Every one of us is shadowed by an illusory person, a false self. This is the person I want myself to be, but who cannot exist because God does not know anything about this person. And to be unknown of God is altogether too much privacy. My false and private self is the one who wants to exist outside the reach of God's will and God's love, outside of reality and outside of life. And such a self cannot help but be an illusion. We are not very good at recognizing illusions, least of all the ones we cherish about ourselves, the ones we are born with and which feed the roots of sin. For most of the people in the world, there is no greater subjective reality than this false self of theirs, which cannot exist. A life devoted to the cult of this shadow is what is called a life of sin.
Thank you. Powerful words, aren't they? If you don't know who Thomas Merton is, he's a Trappist monk who did a lot of writing in the 60s. He's got some great books out there. One of my favorite being some correspondence between him and Dorothy Day about contemplative and active life. Really interesting. It's called The Life You Save May Be Your Own. So Thomas Merton brings out some key, I think, Christian language for us to begin to think about the Enneagram, a system of personality, 9 personalities, that are trying to help us see our false self. And the underlying assumption is that this false self that is completely unknown of God has been shaped and formed by sin. And so this is why the Enneagram wants to help you get out of the box, because it's not the life that you're meant to be living. There is a unique and beautiful individual self underneath all of that illusion. So, what is sin? Have y'all seen this image before? Hamartia in Greek. Sin is not, so often we think about sin as worthlessness or like a lack in the self. We're really harsh with ourselves about sin. Hamartia, the most common word used in Greek to describe sin, means missing the mark. You aimed for something good, and you missed. And we can't. It doesn't ascribe intention. Sometimes you might mean to miss, but sometimes you were really aiming for the bullseye. So sin is missing the mark. And I love that this is the primary word used in Scripture, the New Testament, for sin, because I think it points to often the innocence that's underneath the ways in which we do harm to ourselves, to others, separation with God. So these are the 9 types, and you'll see I put 2 different titles, I guess, for them on your sheet in front of you, so you might hear me use the words interchangeably. So if you look at the first row on the sheet, for instance, here you've got the perfectionist, and then if you flip it to the other side, it'll say 1 is the reformer. Those are the same types, just some different language used by different teachers. So sin, right now we're going to go back to desert monasticism in the 4th century. So a time after Constantine in his Edict of Milan has decided that Christianity is now a national religion. It's something that you automatically are. You're automatically a Christian if you were born in the Roman Empire. And there's a crew of faithful women and men that we end up ascribing the titles Amma and Abbas, the mothers and fathers of the faith, who said, this is BS. That Constantine doesn't make me a Christian. Don't I have some consent in this? And so they leave, they hightail it out to the desert. And while they're there, there is one monk in particular named Evagrius Ponticus, or Evagrius of Pontus. And he is charged with systematizing desert monasticism. So he, as he's living in community with other monks, he starts to notice patterns of missing the mark that he himself, his sisters and brothers are experiencing, and he starts to jot them down and write them down. And the word used in his writings and in other writings of the desert monastics at this time to describe the sin that starts to shape a personality. I mean, he didn't use the word personality at the time. He used schemata, but we'll get into that in a little bit. The word that he uses in the writings is logismoy. Anybody know what logos is in Greek? The word. Okay. It can also mean thing, word or thing. Add that moy on the end and it becomes like a little one, like a little thing. A little word, a little thought. And he starts to see that it's the little things throughout the day, the habits that we begin to develop, are shaping and forming a false self. And so these are some of the words associated with Evagrius Ponticus's definition of logismoy. Evil thoughts, little things, distractions. Some of the language, the metaphor used are cracks in the heart. And I like that one because I feel like it points to hamartia. You were aiming for something, a wholeness, but didn't quite get it right. It had a little crack in it. And these are the little things that lead us from an awareness of spiritual presence, of beingness, of reality, of the reality that God has intended for us. And this lack, they lead us away from spiritual presence, God's presence, spiritual presence within us, within recognizing it within one another, and cause us to focus on absence, what we do not have, disconnection, lack of presence. And what history books spread more widely from Evagrius Ponticus is what eventually became known as the 7 deadly sins. But originally, there were 8, maybe 9. We'll get into some of that history. So here's an image of the 7 deadly sins here. I don't remember which artist it was. It was a modern artist, but I kind of like the images. Someone who's a Bible nerd wants to read Matthew for us. You don't have to be a nerd, but who likes the Bible? Someone read Matthew aloud for us.
I'll do it.
Thank you.
Nothing about the Bible.
You might be.
When the unclean spirit has gone out of a man, he passes through waterless places seeking rest, but he finds none. Then he says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when he comes, he finds it empty, swept, and put in order. Then he goes and brings with him 7 other spirits more evil than himself, and they enter and dwell there, and the last state of that man becomes worse than the first.
Thank you. So this is the image in Scripture, this parable, is what Evagrius Ponticus was reading in his cell, his monastic cell, and pondering, and began to shape and write down these 8 spirits, because there was one, and he went back and got all of his friends. The 7 other spirits. Okay. We're going to pause on that for a little bit. I'm going to try to make a fuller picture of these logismoi, these little things. So I'm going to need more reading volunteers. These are some quotations from the desert monastics. So not Evagrius Ponticus, but those that were living in community in the 4th century. So let's get a clearer sense of these logismoi and what they looked like, or what the monks were thinking about them. I think I've got about 6 quotations, so if you haven't read yet, please volunteer. Someone read this one? Thanks, Kate.
We stand condemned not because logismoi come into us, but for putting the logismoi to bad use. It is possible to be shipwrecked as a result of logismoi, and it is possible to be crowned as a result of logismoi.
I love this again, right? We're looking at the sins that shape us. Again, what's it called that you're shooting the arrow at? The target, right? The target is not good or bad. It's a target. But you have some sense of how to shape and mold your aim. And it can be a source of great joy and growth. And it can also be, and is also, sometimes we're shipwrecked in it. We live in the false self. But I love this quotation because it's not... it's honest and balanced and invites us to be the same. Another quotation, Logismoy.
If you do not have logismoy, you do not have hope. If you do not have logismoy, you have the act. This means that he who does not battle sin in his mind, nor contradict it physically, indulges in it. For he who does the deeds is not troubled by logismoy.
Okay. Any thoughts on this one? So why I like this one is the Logismoy were shared in community with spiritual directors. And Richard Rohr is an Enneagram teacher who's a proponent of this. He says the Enneagram was really meant to be passed down from spiritual director to directee and so on. And there's this idea of confession in it, that if you do not, if you confess the Logismoy, what is happening in you, then you do not have to complete the act. So it's this awareness that there are temptations. We hear a lot in Christian morality, spirituality, the temptations that these people living in isolation in the desert, in community, had to face, these 7 deadly sins. And they were trying to learn how to deal with the reality of their presence and not pretend like they weren't there.
So are you taking questions?
I can.
So when it says, for he who does the deeds is not troubled by logismoy, that, oh no, I just went down.
Oh, sorry.
That's the, if you acknowledge the noise in your head, and then don't let it lead you down a stray path,
Yes.
then you have contradicted it.
Yes, it's lost its power
It's lost
over
its power.
you.
But if you let it lead you down the path, that means you've physically indulged in it and you've done the deed. Got it.
Thank you. Last one on this slide. Thanks.
It is good not to hide the logismo, but to declare them to spiritual and discerning elders, not to those who have only gone white with time.
This is a safety question, and goes back to what I was talking about with Richard Rohr's declaration about Logismoy, that talking about these things with those who are on similar spiritual journeys or are further along the journey than you, it's not an age thing. It's about spiritual emergence, spiritual awareness, moving toward being in connection rather than the lack thereof. So discerning is the key word, please.
I'm also hearing in here that they are acting on you whether you acknowledge them or not. So it's better to acknowledge them.
Yes, because if you don't acknowledge them, they will likely trap you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you will move into a habit that you're not aware of. How do we get rid of them? Other quotations. Another reader, please.
Shall the axe boast without him that hews with it? As for you, see that you neither lend your hand to the logismoi nor take pleasure in them, and they are impotent.
Oh. So this is one of the strategies. I've heard people do something similarly with affirmation. When people are praising what you do, I remember a teacher of mine saying, it's sort of like a little fly buzzing in your ear. Just kind of let it be there. This is one of the strategies. It can be true of the logismoi that you can see it and recognize it and say, I'm not going to let that one bother me. But awareness is the key. Another reader, please. Thank you. Sorry, I'm making you run around, Sam.
Just as with a chest with clothes, they rot away in time. If a person abandons it, so it is with the logismoi. If we do not physically perform them, they rot away in time and disappear.
Yeah. I love this very physical metaphor for something that's happening in the interior home of your soul. Awareness of a crack in your own heart and sort of delicately placing it into a box and just letting it be in the attic or basement somewhere. Another reader, please. Almost done reading quotations, I promise.
Just as if somebody puts a snake and a scorpion into a jar and seals up the mouth, they die completely in the course of time. Likewise, evil logismoi also expire with patient endurance.
So these last two quotations in particular, we get the sense of this is not an immediate withering away of the logismoi. It does take time and energy and attention even to move something, even to seal something into a jar or move it into the attic. I'll read this one. I'll give you all a break. So this is my man. And if anybody ever finds this icon, please get it for me. I'll pay you back. I cannot find this icon of Evagrius Ponticus anywhere. So this is the father of desert spirituality. If one of the monks should wish to acquire experience with the cruel demons, these logismoi, and become familiar with their skill, let him observe the logismoi and let him note their intensity and their relaxation, their interrelationships, their occasions, and let him seek from Christ the reasons for these things. For the demons become quite infuriated with those who partake more gnostically in the practical life. Wherever evil enters, there is also ignorance. The hearts of the holy will be filled with knowledge. So when the desert monastics are talking about sealing something into the attic or into a jar, they're not saying don't think about it, not saying don't try to understand it. Knowing is key on the spiritual journey. And that's what's highlighted in this quotation. You can also see the beginnings of the systematic relationship that Evagrius is shaping in his own mind. Oh, yeah, I have this. I can use this, right? Interrelationships. And this is where we start to see some of the shaping of the symbol of the Enneagram. Okay, so here's a little bit of the history at a glance. So the logismoi that Evagrius wrote down, and then now in 2020, the shape that it has, the name and shape it has in the Enneagram system. You're going to see a lot of similarities from the 4th century to now. So type 1, anger. Type 2, pride. Type 3, self-glory, vanity. So we have a slight change in language there. 4, type 4, sadness and self-pity, envy. Type 5, avarice. Type 6, not there. We'll get there in a minute. Type 7, gluttony. 8, lust. 9, acedia, spiritual apathy, to sloth. So the logismoi are the sin that type often misses the mark. And it's what shapes the personality type in the Enneagram system. Okay. So my theory, this really is just my theory, but is that Evagrius Ponticus may have been a 6. It's the one he did not put into his systematization, right? And seeing ourselves is often the hardest the hardest number to see. But he wrote an entire book called the Schemata, in which he describes something called the irascibles. And he writes it about his own struggles. So he never names the Enneagram 6 content, except for in an entire volume. The irascibles attack on the soul. And his description of the irascible is a combination of anger and sadness. They join in the attack on the soul and shape a logismoy that emerges as intertwining streams of violence, fear, and frustration that lurk in the depths of my heart. What I think he was really writing. When rightly ordered, the irascible's energy can produce certain virtues, namely courage and endurance. When used rightly, the irascible is a power of the soul capable of destroying logismoy. So he sees the energy that we're going to soon see is the energy of type 6 as the greatest, hardest one to see, hardest one to wrap his mind around, this convoluted combination of violent fear and frustration that can produce courage. And he just named the type 6 in the Enneagram structure in his volume. And if you'll see in the two words that I gave you to describe the Enneagram 6, one is skeptic. Did I put loyalist? I hope I put loyalist in the other. The loyal skeptic, going back and forth, this violent fear and frustration. And we'll see in just a little bit, or if you glance at your chart, you'll see that the virtue of that type is courage, moving from fear to courage. So my theory is that he's a 6. All right. We're actually not doing too bad on time, I think. So this is the chart that you have in front of you. And I added this slide, so let me just see what's coming next. Okay, yeah. All right. Let's walk through this a little bit so that you know what you're taking home with you. So the Enneagram system is a system of self-awareness and self-work that can help you find your truest self behind the facade of the false self. And there is work that can fill a lifetime with it. It is a system that you can choose to buy into and work that system. And something I found most helpful is the work on childhood wounds. I remember my friend and I, over a pint, were coming up with the worst possible first date questions that you could ask. And one of mine was, so like, what's your childhood wound? But why not? You learn so much about somebody. So I want to start here with the wounds and show you a little bit about how each type is shaped, because we often don't start with the wounds when you're learning the Enneagram. And I think it's a helpful sort of chronological way for us to think about our own development of an ego self. So the wound, these are summaries, remember? But the wound for this ego, this false self of the Enneagram 1, is a belief that there is something wrong in the world, something's wrong in the world, and I'm in it. Something's wrong with me. I am flawed to the core. And this wound shapes a vice, a logismoy, of anger. Something should be done about this. And an ego structure is shaped around anger, about trying to make something right that was wrong. And the structure that takes shape is the structure of a perfectionist. There's got to be a right way. I've got to find it. And I like thinking about vices with the metaphor of a vice grip, something that just has you contracted. It's got its hold on you. Because in the Enneagram system, you can't just work really hard and attain virtue, especially if you're the perfectionist. That is not going to happen. The more you try to be serene, the more you are living into the type of the perfectionist. I will be the most perfect, serene person that ever existed. Not going to be helpful. So I like to think about the vice grip because the way that an individual moves toward virtue is not by tightening their vice, but by releasing it. So you let the vice grip go. What if I let go of the anger? And often that's what leads an ego type into existential crises. But who would I be if I let go of this? Well, you'd no longer be the perfectionist. Who would you be? And when that vice is released, then the virtue can arise for that type and for the one that is serenity. And the virtues get us closer to all along what we were trying to aim for on the target in the first place, which is some quality of being within God. And so the perfectionist structure desired that there be no wrong in the world. This is the desire of perfect being, where all of us are one together. But the one couldn't make that happen. The one had to release that energy of anger to move towards serenity and realize, oh, perfection is here already. I haven't been able to see it. And there are deeper descriptions of all of these holy ideas, virtues, vices, ego types. But I've got 15 minutes to plow through them. So you're gonna keep. If you look on the back of your sheet, I do have places that you can start. And those two websites, well, Enneagram Worldwide is what I'm being trained as a teacher in. So I recommend that as a starter place.
And that does sort of the monastic piece of it?
No, that one's me, and you can find that in there's some other teachers out there that'll talk about Evagrius Ponticus. But yeah, you will find all of these concepts in it, though. Yeah. Okay.
Richard Rohr book is pretty good too.
Yeah, his I forget what his is called.
There were two voices, that was very distracting.
Yeah.
The Sacred Enneagram.
The Sacred Enneagram. There's a lot of great books out there, and right, each one of these books is written by a type. Okay, so it may not be a type that you're really great at hearing too. Like I have trouble with Richard Rohr's book. There are quotations from him that I love, but when I read it, I'm like, bleh, it just kind of falls flat for me. And some points I just completely strongly disagree with him. So he has that sort of like energy with me. I like Helen Palmer. She's one of my teachers, and she's very mystical. She's a type 6, and I seem to be able to jive with energy. But there's a lot of great teachers out there, so it's finding your own that can walk along you in your path. So let's do that same jumping. I'm going to move through them a little bit quicker, but with each type. So the wound of the 2 is I'll never get my needs met. So easier to just not have needs. So that's what I will do. And to assume you have no needs requires quite a bit of pride. I am unique in this. I don't have any needs like the rest of you. And that vice grips this person. And so in order to combat it, to remain in that battle with it, they give and they give and they give and they give, hoping someone is actually going to meet the need that they don't even know that they have. So that's that pride that shapes that ego, not knowing that they have needs They're always looking for them to be satisfied, but they give instead of ask for help or receive. And letting go of that vice of pride allows humility to emerge, which moves the two closer to this realization that they do not have to be bound by caring for all the needs of everybody else. They actually have their own will and need that they can have met if they'll just listen to it. The type 3, the wound is there is no support in this world, and so I'm just not going to feel. I just won't let the emotions affect anything that I do because I'm not going to get support for them. And the vice that begins to shape a type is this idea of vanity. If I don't have any core feelings, then there's really nothing to shape a core self. So I can just be whatever you need me to be. I can do it. I can do it all. I'm a chameleon. There's no real self here. And this shapes the performer, who can be all things to all people except for to themselves. And the release of that vice allows for authenticity to emerge. Oh, I actually do have something that I desire for me, or something I'm sad about, or something I'm happy about. Just allowing that reality to sink in gives them hope that there is a self there to find. How exciting. What a journey that will be. The wound of the type 4, there is no center to hold me. There has been a great tragedy in the world, and they can feel that tragedy in their own lives and see it. Focus of attention goes there. And so this vice that holds them and locks them into this idea that there is a tragedy, that there is no center for me, as they look around and see what appear to be the whole lives of other people. And they see what they don't have. And they're angry that they don't have it. They want it for themselves. They have some sense that they deserve it. And they do. But they're only seeing the lack, what's missing. And this shapes an idealist. Well, I will just perpetually imagine the most ideal experience that I need to satisfy what's missing in me, but nothing's ever going to match up. And so to release envy, the vice of envy, equanimity can emerge, an ability to see the unity or center of each moment, rather than living in a projected imaginary future or the tragedy of the past. For the type 5, the wound is that there is no connection out there for me, and I'm small, and I probably can't really affect anything in the world. The vice that holds this type in its place is avarice, so I'm just going to hold on to what's mine. There's no real connection that I can make with it anyway. There's nothing I can really do in the world with it. And then that shapes an observer personality. I'll just stay back and watch it all. And everything that I learn and glean from what I see, I'll keep to myself. But when the observer can release avarice, release holding on to the knowledge, life experience, they begin to live a life of non-attachment to that knowledge and to share and actually step into the world and begin to do things and make change. I just realized I hate it when I do this to a 4 because 4s always notice that something is missing. I'm looking at my sister who I think we'll acknowledge that she's a 4. I realized I forgot to talk about the holy idea with the 4, so sorry about that. And any other 4s in the room. I'll finish the 5 here, and then I'll move back to that. So the observer releases avarice, moves toward non-attachment and being in the world, and recognizes that all of the knowledge is there for us to all be connected to at all times. This was never any individualized knowledge from me that I needed to hold on to. This was for all of us and meant to be active in the world. And again, those are always tapping into some sort of godlike characteristic, the holy ideas. So moving back to the 4, what I missed was the 4 is moving toward healing this wound that there is no center. They've realized that it is literally from God that they have come, and that is a connection they have never lost and can never lose. It's always there. So they don't need to be jealous or envious of anything anybody else has because they have it too. It's all there for their taking. The wound for the type 6 is there is no one to trust. I'm terrified. And the vice that keeps this reality in place is fear. It's always worst case scenario out there. But when that vice creates one of the most complicated types in the system, thank you, Evagrius, the loyal skeptic. I don't know who to believe, which side to go to. And so I just always feel pulled in both directions, and I freeze. I'm just frozen here. I'm both loyal and skeptical, and I can't move. And when we talk about fight, flight, or freeze, 6 is frozen there. Now, if we go back to something I was just reading in a recent article that I really liked, go back to that triangle image in the Enneagram, and I said the 3 types on the triangle are the most sort of stable in the system. That's 3, 6, and 9. And all of them have this energy of freeze in the middle, an energy that allows motion to come in the 2 points that are connected to them. And that's another class. But if you're looking at all at the 3, 6, and 9, and it feels like, well, that's me, and that's me, and that's me, you're likely in the 3, 6, 9 somewhere. But there's some similarities that you'll see with this freeze, this inability to move. For 6s, it's with their thoughts. For 9s, it's with their actions. And for 3s, it's with their emotions. So back to the 6, this loyal skeptic that feels caught in between skepticism and being loyal. When they can release the vice of fear, courage emerges and moves them toward faith. Well, there may not be a perfect scenario out there. I may not be able to figure that one out. But right now, the ground is holding me up. And just becoming aware of the ways in which I am being held and cared for. Maybe I don't have to be terrified. Maybe I can trust that there is something good out there holding us all up. Type 7, the wound, is that there is no divine plan. Therefore, I must make one. And so the vice that holds this type in place is this desire to search, experience everything. A friend of mine who's a 7, she always has like 26 browsers open on her laptop, always. And they're totally different fields, like it'll be like spirituality and medical and science, and she's just soaking it all in. So gluttony I've got to know everything so that I can make this life a good one because I've only got one and nobody else is looking out for me. So that holds the type together and they become the epicure. Eat, drink, be merry. Let's make it a good one. But this journey of trying to create their own plan assumes that they can know a lot, that they can know what's going to come next or what should come next. And always living in this sort of amped up energy can leave them internally feeling alone and never really looking at the sadness or pain that they're feeling in their lives. And so when they release gluttony, filling, sobriety can take over. It's not an exciting journey for a 7 to think about being sober in life energy. But moving through that sadness, moving through the pain that sobriety can bring, wisdom emerges. They actually begin to tap into divine plan. So can make wiser choices in the planning of their own lives. Type 8 wound. This is my own type, so it's always hard for me to see it on paper. The wound for type 8 is something terrible happened and I did it. So 8s have a strong sense of sin. And something I read recently that really resonated with me, I think can speak to a savior complex in 8s, is that 8s are ashamed that they're not God. I can't make change the things that I feel like we should all be empowered to change. And so often it takes on a shape of justice in 8s, but 8s can take on a sort of savior complex and want to be the ones to fix it. So the vice that holds this personality structure in place is lust. And it can be sexual lust, but what it is for the 8 is a lust for like life energy, for intensity, and a very strong will. I know what I want and I will just go for it. And that shapes a protector. The irony is that when 8s the 8s focus attention outward and so think that they're protecting other people, but often leave themselves completely unprotected. Think of it in terms of like, I used to play a lot of video games when I was younger, still sometimes. But the big like steel armor, or if you like watch the movie Gladiator or something like that, you'll see like Russell Crowe kneel down. He's like all bulked up in armor, but then when he kneels down, like the back of his leg is completely exposed. So like this false reality that I'm wearing all the armor that I need, but like you could hit me in the armpit, no problem. So completely vulnerable in spaces. So when the 8 can release their will and just let the flow of life happen, innocence emerges. The reality of the intention all along was trying to tap into this holy idea of truth. Oh boy. Okay. So type 9, the wound for type 9 is that there is no unconditional love. Now, 9 believes in this for others. But for the 9, love is a temporary experience. It's not something that's always accessible. And the 9 realizes, their self-realization is that I'm therefore inferior. I'm unable to tap into this love that I can see that holds everybody else up, but not me. And so the vice that holds them in place is, there's really no need to work on me then. I might as well put the energy with those that have some change to make in the world. It's not going to come from me. I can't do it. I don't have enough energy to do this, enough me to do this, enough love to tap into to make this happen. And so they become the mediator or the peacemaker and are very, very good at recognizing the loving ground that everybody else needs to stand on. But they feel lost in that shuffle. And if the 9 can release this sloth-like energy, which it's not about, 9s can be very active in the world doing things, but can tend to get lost in mundane tasks rather than in the self-attention needed to bring right action into the world. And so when the 9 will focus and put their attention and energy in themselves, right action emerges. They knew all along what the right thing was, and it was tapping into this love that's not just for everybody else, but for me too. And the vision that they have, when it emerges, it's both satisfying to others just as it is to them. Okay, I've got no time. And what I was originally going to do was move through these slides while I talked about that movement, but I thought it was going to be too hard. So these are snapshots. I will just pause on each one for just a couple of seconds, and then I will go put robes on and leave you all here with all your questions. So if you just want a snapshot of the types and you're trying to play with what your type might be, this is 1, the perfectionist or the reformer. 2, the helper or the giver. 3, the performer. 4, the idealist, romantic, melancholic, depending on the day. 5, the observer, investigator. 6, loyal skeptic. 7, epicure. 8, the challenger, the protector. 9, the peacemaker, mediator. And that is a quick glance at the spirituality of the Enneagram. And hopefully we'll plan some sort of a retreat or further study where we can piece apart more of this for each of us as individuals. Thanks all.